So we're well into December now, which means it's time to start looking back on this past year. I sort of started doing that with the awards show video a few days ago, which is doing very well thanks to all you guys who participated and made that possible. But that was all you guys, all of your picks. It is time for me to make up my own mind and share my concluding thoughts and lists regarding 2022. I got my best country albums, best country songs, worst country music, best all genre music, all coming up. But this year I wanted to kick off my rewind season with my favorite country artists of 2022. This list is very subjective because there's a lot of factors and criteria that may have led me to place one artist over another. It's not who had the biggest year numerically or dropped the best albums, it's what artists stood out to me personally this year. What artists really outdid themselves this year, consistently dropping great music, staying the most relevant and entertaining to follow along with. It really comes down to who made the most of 2022 in my world, who stood out this year. Number 10 has got to be Megan Moroney. Megan is one of only 2 artists who made this list without dropping an album this year, but she didn't need to. On the back of her fantastic EP, Pistol Made of Roses, she turned herself into the musical equivalent of must-see television. I had never even heard her name before this year, but ever since discovering her, every time I see Megan Moroney's dropping, she's one of, if not the first person I'm going to check out. Megan just has that X factor, her beauty pageant aesthetic, which is juxtaposed by her very rough, weathered voice, and her songwriting is so unique and insightful. She's very vulnerable, very observational, and is very good at articulating those tendencies. She's also now dating Morgan Wallen, which I'm slightly disappointed by, not because I think it'll have a negative impact on their musical endeavors, but because I still had a chance with Morgan. And I mean, I still do. Don't count me out by any means. Like, if Megan's not careful, I'm gonna swoop in, but... Number 9 is Colby Cooper. Unlike Megan Moroney, I've known about Colby for a few years now, and although I think he actually made more noise in the previous 2 years, truthfully, I was never a big fan. I only knew him as the 2 Words guy, and I sort of just wrote him off as like a Co Wetzel clone, just another long-haired guy from Texas making bitter rock music. Basically, like I said, another helping of Co Wetzel, but then he dropped his album this year, Boy from Anderson County to the Moon, and my whole perspective on him has changed. I just thought this album showed the most well-rounded, mature version of Colby, and I couldn't shut it off. I'll talk about this album more in my top 10 albums video. Spoiler alert, it's on there. But I was just really impressed how Colby was able to completely flip my idea of him in like a month. At number 8, I'm going to say Hardy. Hardy is the second and final artist who made this list, despite not dropping an album, but he didn't drop an EP either. The reason Hardy is making this list is because of how he bounced back from Hicks Tape 2 at the end of last year, which I thought was this hollow redneck mess of a project. But this year Hardy didn't just bounce back from a little hiccup. He came back and made himself one of the most interesting figures in all of country music. And not just mainstream, I'm talking coast to coast, the entire map of country music. You will be hard-pressed to find an artist more ambitious, more driven, and more interesting than Hardy. He's gearing up for what's building to be a massive album release in January of 2023, but the pre-releases of this album have been so intriguing. Despite Hardy not always being my cup of tea, and even though I'm still not a big fan of Truck Bed, although I have ripened up to it over the last little while, I admire the extent to which Hardy refuses to play it safe. He is going for the Grand Slam every single time. Every punch he throws, he is going for the spectacular knockout. And even though not every punch can land, I feel like he's breaking the ice and hopefully encouraging other artists to go big on something, showing them that you can be inventive, you can be experimental beyond just collaborating with a pop artist and making like a really mediocre love song. Number 7, I'm saying Jon Pardi. Jon Pardi does this thing where he disappears for like 3 years after an album. We hardly hear from him. He's a pretty reserved guy online, apart from that Lainey Wilson ad he did, which was incredible.
Ever since I saw Lainey's bell bottoms, I knew I had to get me some.
But every time he does return, it's like this emphatic "the king is back" moment. Country music is just a better genre when Jon Pardi is playing an active part in it. And he was in 2022. Unlike Hardy though, he wasn't doing anything different from before. He just showed up, dropped 3 teasers over the course of a few months, and then dropped the whole album, but it's so undeniably great, it needs no flash to go along with it. 2022 is just another reminder that Jon Pardi is truly one of the best our genre has had to offer over the last decade or so, with every release further cementing himself. Number 6, I'm going Co Wetzel. I think Co Wetzel surprised everyone this year, and I feel similarly to him as I do Colby earlier on this list, only Co did the same thing to a greater extent. Up until this point, Co's entire brand was built on this tough guy like drugs, sex, and rock and roll, but in 2022, Co stopped holding up that act, and it caught everyone, myself included, very off guard. The reason I find this switch so impressive is because Co had dug himself so deep into this hole. He had built so much around this persona that to break that cycle was going to take something as grand and deep as El Paso. So what did he drop? El Paso. While I think 2022 was a great year for Ko, I think time will make it a much more important year for his career as he takes a big turn and begins his route down a more country path. I think 2022 will be looked back on as the turning point of his career. At number 5 is Kelsey Ballerini. Ever since her sort of self-titled album Kelsey back in 2020, she became one of the most fascinating mainstream artists in my book. That album just showed a level of vulnerability and honesty that I wasn't expecting from someone in her position. But the album itself was still pretty spotty, and so even though I saw a wealth of potential there, I wasn't very optimistic she would ever tap into it. She tapped into it. Subject to Change is one of the most authentic albums of the year. It actually felt like Kelsey steering her own ship for the first time in her career. Watching Kelsey come into full form was one of my favorite storylines of 2022 because I was skeptical I would ever see the day. So to see the potential I saw years ago be realized was just awesome. At number 4, I've got Lainey Wilson. It's hard to discuss the state of country music in 2022 without mentioning the name Lainey Wilson, and rightfully so. Not only did she take off commercially and numerically, but 2022 was the year Lainey Wilson became one of the top female acts in country music. And if she keeps going at this rate, she will most likely become the Reba or the Carrie of this generation. She just has it, that star power mixed with innovation and quality. She just got so much done this year. Coming off the success of her debut album, she entered the year with her foot on the gas, wasted no time starting the rollout for her sophomore album, Bell Bottom Country, which is a pretty great album. Not necessarily one of my outright favorite albums from this year, but still a really solid body of work. She wiped the CMA Awards, which granted, not that CMAs hold much value anymore, but when mainstream and independent fans agree on a corporate award winner, the winner's doing something right. She also transitioned over to Yellowstone, which has become its own phenomenon in country music culture, which has obviously only propelled Lainey further. Yeah, Lainey Wilson really put in a shift this year. Podium time! Number 3, I got Ernest. I've been warning you guys about Ernest ever since the tail end of 2020. I told y'all to get him on your radar because sooner than later, he was just gonna be there anyway. And what happened this year? Exactly what I said was going to happen. 2022 was a huge year for Ernest. He kicked it off on the final day of 2021 with Flower Shops, which became his breakout hit, but anyone in the know with Ernest knew that was going to happen. It just had hit written all over it, and then getting Morgan Wallen on that song was probably the best decision he's made. And he's already getting set for his next album, which I believe is set for early 2023 as well. Ernest just can't make a wrong move right now, and his activity is only helping him because with every new wave of fans coming in, they've always got something current to look forward to, whether that's solo shows or touring with a big name like Wallen or dropping new music. Literally this Friday, there's 2 new singles coming out. Yeah, 2022 was Ernest's year. He absolutely killed it, and I cannot wait to see what he does in 2023. Runner-up, silver medal, it's gotta be Zach Bryan. Just like how you can't talk about the state of country music in 2022 without bringing up Lainey Wilson, you can't talk about music as a whole in 2022 without talking about Zach Bryan. What he accomplished this year was absolutely astounding, becoming one of the most streamed human beings on the planet. His tour with Charles Wesley Godwin was absolutely iconic because he turned around and was writing songs about the tour and releasing them while he was still on the tour. Zach Bryan's activity this year would intimidate a personal trainer. He was almost dropping too much music. It got to the point this summer where I was almost begging him to stop because I hadn't even gotten through the first album, and you're already dropping another one, and then you've already got 3 singles the following week after that. You know, I did kind of get overwhelmed when all the new music was dropping at once. A lot of it sort of blended together, but now being a few months removed from the Zach Bryan frenzy we found ourselves in, now listening to the music with a set of patient and open ears, I'm finally seeing just how consistently high quality his music was this year. I don't think Zach will ever reach these heights again. I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer. I'm just trying to be honest. You can't catch lightning in a bottle twice, but that doesn't mean it wasn't incredible to witness the first time. When talking about American Heartbreak, I often mention the moment it created, but really this whole year was a moment for Zach Bryan, and it was just awesome to be a part of it. And especially if you're like me and have been rocking with Zach since the end, it only made this year that much more rewarding to watch. But who could possibly beat Zach Bryan, right? Like, who do I think had a better year? Remember, this is a personal list, and personally, who do I think had the best year? Muscadine Bloodline. Y'all know I love Muscadine. I've been on board with them since the early days of the pandemic back in 2020, and I feel like each year they've continually outdone themselves, and they did it again in 2022. They were active throughout the entire year, always with something new, and the music was just perfect every single time. When making this list, the reason I chose to put Muscadine over Zach Bryan is because there was absolutely zero fat on everything Muscadine did. While Zach easily had a more iconic year, like I said, there was a lot to go through. a lot to unpack, which can be a blessing in its own way, but every time Muscadine dropped, it was exactly what I needed and nothing more, and I appreciate that. They started the year with one of my favorite albums, Dispatch to 16th Ave, which is arguably the most concise album of the entire year, arguably the most slept on album of the entire year, and I'm not one of those people that calls anything that's not the size of Luke Combs slept on. I genuinely think people completely slept on this album. Like, y'all act like it never even came out. But after that, they took no time off. They've kept coming back with new singles, all of which have been bangers, like Me on You, which is easily one of the most fun songs of the entire year.
Girl, I hope your daddy doesn't own a gun. If he does, then I'm done from the things that you're doing to me.
They've already confirmed their next album is done and ready, so it looks like they're gearing up for another fantastic year in 2023. But yeah, overall, 2022, Muscadine were the ones that kept scratching that itch. They kept me hooked all year and well deserving of the #1 spot. So those are my favorite country artists in 2022. I'd love to know your winners of the year in the comments below. Who could you just not get enough of? Who impressed you the most? If you're interested, links to my Instagram, Discord, podcast, and Patreon can be found in the description below. If you enjoyed, as always, a like really does help me out. And if you're new, maybe consider subscribing for some more country music content. It's what all the hip kids are doing these days. And yeah, until next time, I hope you guys have a fantastic day and look forward to a bunch of lists coming out now.